Built in 1978, the Loch Ness Monster is the definition of a classic roller coaster. An ace coaster landmark, the Loch Ness Monster is not only notable for its legacy, as it is still a very good ride. Standing 130 feet tall, the coaster was the tallest complete circuit in the world upon its initial opening, something rather difficult to believe today, considering how far the industry has come in a measly 40 years. The Ron Toomer-designed coaster was also notable for another reason upon opening. It was the first coaster to feature interlocking loops. While other coasters would eventually utilize this element, all would also be torn down, leaving the Loch Ness Monster once again as the only coaster possessing this feature. This unique element is perhaps one of the greatest reasons for the coaster's longevity, but it's certainly not the only one. The rest of the coaster's design decisions also remain respectable today, including a 60-mile-per-hour top speed and a magnificent use of the terrain. But perhaps the greatest reason why the Loch Ness Monster remains popular is how well Busch Gardens Williamsburg has maintained the attraction. Many aerodynamics custom loopers still possess impressive specs, but are horrifically rough. The Loch Ness Monster is devoid of this problem. While one would not call this coaster the smoothest among the park's repertoire, especially considering the quantity of B&M coasters there, it certainly provides a far superior ride to the majority of its brethren. The ride opens with a small right bank before a left turn that leads into the lift hill. After ascending 130 feet, the coaster then disengages from the chain lift and makes a left turn into the first drop. At only 114 feet, the initial drop seems rather unassuming, but despite its small size, the drop is still incredulously thrilling. This can most likely be attributed to the rather steep angle of the drop. At 55 degrees, it's no Takabisha, but it allows for a more exhilarating experience than one would expect to encounter on this drop. After the descent, the train then ascends up into a U-turn, putting it on course for entry into one of the track's interlocking loops. The inversion is preceded by another drop in excess of a century mark, though this one is of a decidedly lesser grade. The inversion itself is excellent, though it does not quite reach the heights of those powerful loops on the Tennessee Tornado. An extra element of exhilaration is added by the presence of the steel tracking of a layout's other teardrop only feet away from the rider's head. After pulling out of a loop, the train then ascends into a small hill that provides a small quantity of airtime. These airtime moments are actually surprisingly effective on Loch Ness. Not sure if that's necessarily a good thing considering, but one should never argue with more airtime. The coaster then takes yet another left turn into a small hill before entering a massive indoor downward spiral, composing of almost 3 full rotations. While the cave-like artificial structure contains this element does indeed feature lighting, Busch Gardens does not use it. This is for the better, as it allows the feature to seem far more intense and fast than it actually is, making this something more entertaining than if it were out in the open or visible in any other way. Despite this, the element does indeed overstay its welcome, and for many will eventually become a bore, but it certainly could have been much worse. After exiting the cave structure, the train will then ascend another small hill, punctuated by the best moment of airtime on the coaster, before grinding to a halt on the second lift hill. The Loch Ness Monster is not the beast, and it's not 7,000 feet long. In fact, it's only just over 3,000, which is why it's easy to argue that it's criminal for this coaster to need a second lift. But the second is certainly much smaller than the first, and while the second hill is certainly an inconvenience, it leads to something great, the second of the coaster's interlocking loops. While these loops do lack the level of thrill they had when the high point of two trains would pass through them simultaneously, they are still some of the best of these classic inversions a coaster enthusiast is likely to experience anywhere. This is, again, mostly due to how unique they are. The industry is so incredibly devoid of originality that unique elements like these loops are truly something special. It's also because this unique element that the high point of the coaster that it's fitting the train concludes its voyage after simply completing a slight upward left out of the inversion. Toomer was smart enough when designing this classic not to let it meander around at the end like so many coasters do. This means after hitting the brake run, one is left with an excellent final impression as they depart. Ultimately, the Loch Ness Monster is a classic but flawed experience. The coaster is unique and possesses an excellent first drop as well as 2 fantastic inversions and some unexpected airtime, but it's hampered by an overlong downward spiral and its intrinsically old design, which while classic just can't quite deliver the same thrills as the best coasters of today. The Loch Ness Monster also possesses the same terrible restraints that all of the custom loopers have, which leave one prone to headbanging, less of a problem on Loch Ness due to its relatively smooth ride, and having their arms pinned against the side of the car. The good news for Busch Gardens is that the aforementioned positives do, without a doubt, overshadow the aforementioned negatives. There is a reason the Loch Ness Monster is an undisputed classic and will continue to thrill riders for decades to come. The Loch Ness Monster gets an 8.5 out of 10.